Hello, everybody. Bill Prince here. Welcome to our discussion of Chapter 4, which involves business ethics. Just going to spend a very brief few moments on this particular topic because by now you've probably had a series of courses in which the issue of ethics and business ethics have been discussed. But we do need just to mention a few things about this in the context of our legal environment of business class. In terms of coming up with definitions for ethics and morals and things of that nature, you can look at any number of sources and come up with any number of definitions for these concepts, but I think these definitions are basically clear and workable enough for our purposes. Ethics is defined as moral principles and values applied to social behavior. Now, what those moral principles and values are obviously can be subjects of debate, and ethicists have studied those for many years, going back to the ancient Greeks and even before. Business ethics is the application of those principles applied to various situations that arise in a business setting. Now, of course, we could have the big debate about whether or not there is a distinction between business ethics and regular ethics. For example, can you behave ethically in a non-business domain of your life and then go into the business mode and behave in a different quote ethical close quote behavior? So some would argue that ethics are ethics regardless of what the context of those situations are. Others would indicate that it is potential to have a line between ethics in your personal life and ethics in your business life. And then there's the concept of legal behavior, and that's compliance with the law as it currently exists. And of course, if we look at the law at any given point in time as sort of a summary of society's expectations for the behavior of its members, and sometimes there's obviously moral underpinnings to those, we can see that what is legal is not always going to be ethical, and what is ethical is not always going to be legal. And we'll be talking about that in our discussion questions and some of our work this week. The one thing that I do want you to be aware of, and if you've had courses in social responsibility up to this point in time, is this notion of what's called the triple bottom line. When I was in business school 375 years ago, the bottom line was basically at the end of the day, what did the profits look like? Had you made money or had you shown a loss? That was sort of the benchmark, I guess, for corporate performance. And as we become more sophisticated and more involved, we've come up with a triple bottom line where we start looking not only at the profits that a business is making, because obviously businesses that don't make profits won't be with us very long, regardless of how ethical they are. But in addition to looking at those profits, we also want to look at the impact that business's activity has had on society. And we want to look at the impact that business's activities have had on the planet. What kind of footprint has this business left? So while you can be making money hand over fist, if you're treating people poorly, if you're treating the planet poorly, then under a triple bottom line analysis, you're simply not going to be viewed as being very successful. So finding that proper balance between making money, treating people well, treating Mother Earth well can often be extremely difficult to achieve. And of course, as noted here, many times when you try to balance those things, that can create ethical conflicts, because sometimes making money may be contrary to impact on people, cutting jobs, closing factories, things of that nature. When we talk about ethics, we oftentimes will talk about duty-based ethics versus outcome-based ethics. And in duty-based ethics, we're sort of talking about an underlying concept of duty, regardless of the consequences of the action taken or not taken in keeping with that duty. And that generally arises from religious belief or philosophical reasoning. And, here we're trying to stay away from that idea of like situational ethics. Well, it's right this time, but it's not right that time. And in duty-based ethics, it's sort of this concrete moral code. And under duty-based ethics, we have these two schools of thought: the categorical imperative, which sounds like something out of Star Trek, but under the categorical imperative, we talk about in deciding whether an action is ethical or not, one should consider what effect would be if everyone similarly situated acted in the same way. So if you're judging your behavior, should I make this decision or should I not make this decision? Kind of look 1,000 feet in front of you and say, if everybody behaved this way, what would this world look like, for the good or for the bad? And then we have the principle of rights, and in that situation, in deciding whether an action is ethical or not, we need to consider what effect our action would have on the fundamental rights of other people. So again, there's very much an ethical and empathetic component to that. We're not just sort of devil take the hindmost. This works well for me. I don't care what happens to other people. We want to see how that impacts the rights of other people. And of course, people are complex and people have different rights and interests, and trying to balance those can be very difficult as well. We also have what are called outcome-based ethics, which are a little more slippery, and those are often called situational ethics. And those are ethics based upon the consequences of the action not taken or taken, without regard to any underlying concept of duty or morality. So, in situational ethics, does it work this time? And what I do this time may be entirely inconsistent with what I do next time, based on the situation. So I'm not making my decisions based on religious precepts or deeply ingrained moral principles, but rather what works for me best this time. And unfortunately, in our world today, be it in politics or business, we see situational ethics implied very much and quite frequently, and that can make for some interesting outcomes. All right. Well, historically, in teaching ethics, people want to know, can I create a template for deciding whether this particular behavior or this particular action is going to be ethical or not? And different authors, different philosophers have tried to come up with these templates where you plug in the decision and take it through sort of a flowchart analysis. And those have always been rather problematic in my mind. And the Santa Clara University has an institute for the study of ethics. And if you're ever needing to do research on ethics or have to do a paper or something like that, I would highly recommend that you go to the Ethics Center at the University of Santa Clara, because it is a resource full of lots of information. And they've sort of come up with these questions to ask. I don't know that it's so much a flowchart as it is a series of questions to be aware of. And again, there are no answers. There's only questions, and so many times in asking about ethical issues and in trying to deal with ethical issues, sometimes it's the questions that you ask and not the answers that you get that might be the most important. So the first is to recognize that there might be an ethical issue. If you sort of bull forward and don't even consider the ethical implications of things, why there might be bigger issues. But does that little voice in your head say, maybe that's not the right thing to do? Or are you getting feedback from stakeholders that this potential issue might cause them problems? So, the first thing you need to do is recognize that there might be some sort of ethical concerns. The second thing you need to do is get as many facts as possible. Don't just go forward boldly with the ends justifying the means, but if there's a potential problem, get as many facts as possible. Who might be affected? How might they be affected? What's their interest in the problem? What could we do to minimize the effects to these people of these problems and these issues that we've come up with? And then the third is to evaluate different kinds of actions. And again, this goes back to the idea of asking a lot of questions. And, you might consider these, which actions will produce the most good and do the least harm. That's kind of a cost-benefits analysis almost. Which action best respects the rights of all those with a stake in the decision? Again, you need to do stakeholder analysis. You need to find out who are the stakeholders who are directly and indirectly impacted by this. this. And again, you can't be all things to all people, but what action that you would take might, minimize the harm to most of the people. The third is which option treats people equally or proportionally. In other words, if there are benefits to the decision, are those benefits spread equally or proportionally? If there are harms to the decision, are those harms spread equally or proportionally? Or is one group or one stakeholder collective going to bear the cost of the issue particularly hard? D, what option best serves the community, where that business or where that ethical decision is going to impact? Which solution again will serve the community best? And then this last one, which is a little bit problematic: which option leads me to act as the sort of person I want to be? I often make decisions, about based on, am I going to be able to sleep at night? And it's easy to make decisions, that impact lots of people negatively, and some people, I guess, can go to bed with a clear conscience. But I always try to look inward and say, would I want this to happen to me? Do I want to be viewed as the person who would do this? Now sometimes in the world we get into situations, particularly if you're in leadership roles or something like that, where layoffs, program terminations, things of that nature just have to occur. And while in a perfect world, we would not want to make those decisions because we don't want to be the kind of person who puts people out of work and that kind of thing. We sometimes have to. But, does this decision follow my conscience to the best degree possible? Then the fourth step: make a decision and test it. What would somebody I respect say about my decision? How would the news media cover my decision? In other words, would you want to read about this on the front page of the paper the next day or see it on the news, and have to explain yourself? How would you do that? Another way to look at that is, how would I explain this to my kids? Kids are the best sort of ferreter out of hypocrisy possible. And so if you're making an ethical decision, how could you explain that to your kids, or could you? And then, of course, the final step is you make the decision and then you reflect on the outcome. How did my decision turn out? How were the people affected? Is there anything I can do to go back and maybe change that? Have I learned anything for the future? So again, no perfect model for making ethical decisions, but I think this 5-step inquiry is a relatively decent way to at least sort of frame the right questions. All right, well, that's everything we have quickly on ethics. We will get ready to move into our week 2 material next time, and so we'll visit with you then. Take care.